Hey, so welcome to Psych 92. This is Chapter 2, Part 2, Prenatal Development. Okay, so when we talk about prenatal development, we are talking about interaction of genes and environment. You'll see how environmental components actually can influence what's happening with the development of the child, the fetus. And you'll see kind of reorganization. How is it that we come from this single zygote into actual human being, right, a baby? And you'll see this development is canalized. This is, the order doesn't change. It's going to happen for everybody. So there are three main developmental periods, and they are not the same as what you hear in the hospital about first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. That is not what we're talking about here. Here we're talking about developmental periods that start from conception. So for conception to day 10, it's the germinal period. First 10 days, right? That is from fertilization to implantation into the womb. Then you have the embryonic period. This is a very critical period, 10 days to 8th week. Unfortunately, it's like 2 months, and many people aren't even aware they're pregnant at this point, right? Usually a woman figures it out because she misses a menstrual cycle. So that could be 6 to 8 weeks. So this embryonic period doesn't last very long, but it's when most of the major structures start to form, the organic structures. And then you have the fetal period, which is 9th week to birth. So it's the fetal period that most people are familiar with when they start talking about the different trimesters. But as far as developmental, the developmental component, we are actually looking at germinal, embryonic, and fetal. So you should be aware of when it starts, when it ends, and what are the major developments that happen in each stage. So as I mentioned, germinal period is conception to 10 days. It is a zygote. So there's a picture of an egg, and it's surrounded by sperm cells trying to get to merge with it. So the germinal period starts at the point of conception, when the sperm and egg join in the fallopian tube. So remember, egg cell has 23 chromosomes, sperm cell has 23, it joins, and now the zygote is complete. It has 46 chromosomes, 23 from each of the sex cells. This kind of shows you the trajectory. This is more of obviously an illustration. I have another one that you could see. But what happens is that the ovary releases the egg, right? That's ovulation, and it's called an oocyte. And then the sperm, when there's intercourse and their sperm is released, it goes in and it starts to look for the egg, right? This is all in the fallopian tube. The egg becomes fertilized. It's now called a zygote, and the zygote starts to travel. As you can see, by the second day, it's already multiplying. By the second day, you have first cleavage. It's already starting to grow. It's incredible how quickly the zygote grows. By the 10th day, so as it's traveling in the fallopian tube, it's continuing to grow. And then by the time it implants into the uterus, that is the end of the germinal period. At that point, it's no longer called a zygote, it's called a blastocyst. Here's another example. There's the ovary, releases the egg. That kind of flowery thing, that's the fallopian tube. So fertilization occurs in the fallopian tube, and it starts to travel into the uterus. As it is traveling, it is continuing to grow through mitosis. Any questions? So the zygote floats down the fallopian tube towards the uterus. The zygote is smaller than a pinhead. And by day 10, it is a blastocyst, and it's implanted in the uterus. What do you need to remember? Right here, it begins at conception. So germinal period is the first period of development, begins at conception, ends when the zygote enters and implants in the uterus. So the main development is that the organism grows from a single cell, from the zygote, to hundreds of cells, which is now called the blastocyst. Something to keep in mind is that a lot of things can actually go wrong in just this first period. And so there are many people, many women who are pregnant and don't know that they're pregnant, because if the zygote does not implant correctly in the uterus, then it's not going to continue. The pregnancy will terminate. So something to keep in mind is that germinal period is a really important one, because if that zygote or the blastocyst at that point does not implant in the uterus, the pregnancy will terminate at that point. Any questions about germinal period? Okay, so that's about 10 days. Embryonic period, as I mentioned, is a really important part. So that's day 10 to about 8 weeks, 2 months. What happens here is now you start to get cell differentiation. So you have that blastocyst, which is fairly simple. Now the cells are starting to divide. It's starting to differentiate. Why? Because we're going to be forming our organs, right? So it divides into 3 main parts: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. From the ectoderm, that's where we get our central nervous system, our skin, and our teeth. The mesoderm, right there in the middle, the kind of pinky part, those are our bones, muscles, and the circulatory system. And then the endoderm, the last part, those become our internal organs, our digestive system, and our lungs. Any questions about this? Okay, so that is what an embryo looks like. So what happens in the embryonic period? Differentiation, as I mentioned, from the ectoderm, the endoderm, the mesoderm, and organogenesis. So many of the terms that we use, you can actually break it down. So organo, organs, and genesis is the beginning. It's the beginning of organ formation. In 3 to 4 weeks already, we have a primitive brain, the spinal cord starting to develop, and the heart and muscles are developing as well. First 3 to 4 weeks. A woman doesn't even know she's pregnant in many cases. 5 to 8 weeks, sense of touch is developing, and the embryo can move by the end of this. So this is very important, and I want to make this clear. If you are not actively trying to have a child, please use protection. If you're not going to use protection, you need to think about your behaviors. So if you like to drink a lot, or maybe use recreational drugs, things like that, that could really affect an unborn child. Why? Because in the first 3 to 4 weeks already, the brain, spinal cord, hearts, and muscles are developing. If you drink often, use drugs and all that stuff, and you are pregnant and you continue to do that and you don't know you're pregnant, you're really harming your baby. So I really urge everyone to be conscious of this, not just females, because for males too, use protection. You don't want to have, your child developing in a way that's not ideal because of the behaviors of the person who's carrying the child. It's really important. So in terms of the brain development, here from 25 days, doesn't even look human, all right? All the way up to 9 months, you could see how much the brain develops in just a matter of days. 25 days, 35 days, 40, look in 50 days, 25 days, there's a big difference. 100 days. All of these are happening inside a woman's body, right? And hopefully she's conscious of what she's eating. It's important when women are pregnant to get lots of protein, lots of nutrition. Make sure you get folic acid, because the folic acid is critical in the brain and nervous system development. So stem cells, I'm sure you've heard a lot about stem cells. That's produced along the neural plate, right? So and then you have the neural groove, which appears starting in the 3rd week, and that becomes a neural tube, which is the basis of your brain. What do we start to see? We start to see neurogenesis. The formation of neurons is starting from a very, very early stage in the embryonic component, right? So about 5 months after gestation is the beginning of the pregnancy, you're going to have the most neurons that you'll ever have again in your life. Isn't that fascinating? That in 5 months, you're not even born yet. Almost all the neurons are already there. So neurogenesis in the hippocampus is lifelong. They believe that it's lifelong. So that makes sense. The hippocampus is the part of the brain that controls our memory. It totally makes sense that we continue to form memories. So that's where the only part of our brain really where we think. that it continues nonstop. When we look at brain scans, usually we'll see gray matter and white matter. So gray matter are the regions of the brain that have cell bodies. That's why they're gray, right? So those are responsible for movement and cognitive activity. On the other hand, the white matter that we see are the neurons that have what we call the myelin sheath. They're axons. We'll talk about the brain neurons part. They form neural pathways. And if there's a myelin sheath, the myelin sheath is sort of like insulation, and it helps the processing go faster. Myelin sheath is a fatty substance, which again, it's important not to be on a fat-free diet when you're pregnant because your body needs the fat. You should never put babies on a fat-free diet because their bodies need the fat, their brains need the fat. And it's really important because that's what forms the myelin sheath. The myelin sheath covers the axons, which connects the gray matter areas. So it's all like part of the brain development that starts from only 8th week onto right up to the fetal period. Here's another picture here of embryonic growth. So 14 days, really, really tiny. And at 8 weeks, start to see, what resembles a human being. When we talk about growth, it's important to know there are 2 patterns of growth that are going on. One is cephalocaudal, meaning from head to foot. So that the brain starts to form before the feet form, head to foot, and proximo-distal, meaning from the center outwards. So when we talk about development, what you'll notice is it's the important parts, right? The brain, the organs and everything, that's in the middle of our bodies. And as the pregnancy goes on, then you have the other peripheral components start to develop. So cephalocaudal and proximo-distal. This is a really important chart for you to know because it shows the development and what's happening. So as you can see, germinal period of dividing zygote and implantation, right? What could happen if, the mom's exposed to teratogens or things like that? Prenatal death. So in the germinal period, if something goes wrong, it's likely that the pregnancy will terminate. In the embryonic period, it depends on how far along. Remember, that's 10 days to 8 weeks. So what you see in the bottom are what are things that are being formed: central nervous system, heart, arms, eyes, legs, teeth, palate, external genitalia, and ears. Depending on what stage, that is what could be affected by teratogens and things that are happening. So if a woman is exposed to things, high stress, pollution, disease, you could end up with a child with major structural abnormalities. And this is why I say the embryonic period is so, so critical. Heart is one of the first things that starts to form, the central nervous system and heart. So look at that. That's in week 3. As I mentioned, many women won't even know they're pregnant at that point. So hopefully everyone is engaging in healthy behaviors. If you're not engaging in healthy behaviors, make sure you're using protection. This is for the sake of your unborn child, right? So this chart shows the different organs and at what point they start to develop. Starts with the heart, central nervous system, eyes, heart, arms, legs. And so in many situations, a doctor can tell if there is something abnormal about a baby. They can tell at what point in development the mom was exposed to something, right? Any questions about this chart? Okay. So this is a picture of an 8-week-old embryo. And this is a lot of times at 8 weeks, mom knows she's pregnant. That's why this is the start of that first trimester. Okay, so embryonic period begins at implantation. Usually that's about day 10 and ends around the 8th week. What happens? All major organs have taken primitive shape, sexual differentiation starts, and placenta exchanges nutrients and waste. So sexual differentiation, something many of you may not know, is we all actually start off female. And it is the Y chromosome that triggers the component that will drop. So what was ovaries will drop and become testicles, right? So all of these things are triggered by the presence of the Y chromosome. And that starts to happen in the embryonic period. But we all actually start off female, and it's just that the Y chromosome triggers the change to drop the ovaries to make them testes instead, and starts the rest of the differentiation. Any questions?
Yes, here. So, like you said about we start as female. So, at what stage this white, uh, uh, what term you use, the effect of it comes that it becomes the male hormone. At what stage? When there is intercourse, or it happens on a later stage?
Oh no, okay, so when the sperm, right, is either carrying an X chromosome or a Y chromosome in that sperm cell. So it's
Yeah.
at the conception that it has the chromosome.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Sure. Okay, so here's kind of the thing. I don't look pregnant yet. So Amy, who is 2 months pregnant, wonders how the developing organism is being fed and what parts of the body are being formed. Amy says, I don't look pregnant yet. Does that mean not much development has occurred? Now that you know, what are you going to answer Amy? Has much development occurred? Yes or no? What do you think? Hopefully you all have an answer.
Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. A lot of
Uh,
development occurred. In fact, the most important development in many ways has occurred. So yeah, people who don't know they're pregnant, it's a little scary. So I said, please engage in healthy behaviors. If not, make sure you're using protection or make your partner use protection. So fetal period, 9 weeks to birth. This is the part most people are familiar with because it's like, oh, it's very obvious somebody is pregnant at this point. So in the fetal period, starts with basic tissues, ends with birth. You can see this is what most people are familiar with and think about when they think about somebody who is pregnant. So, the key term here is complexity, right? So now babies can actually react to motion, to light, and to sound. Babies also can start to understand languages. So you might think it's a genetic predisposition to a language, but actually babies can hear from within the womb. And so the language mom speaks, the language that people around her speak, the baby is hearing it. And so already has that kind of tendency to pay more attention to the language that they heard while they were in the womb. So activity is a necessary part of neural development. So when the baby starts moving around in the womb, it's actually helping the brain develop. And learning, we know, can start in the womb. So there's the placenta. What connects the placenta to the baby is the umbilical cord, right? All of this is happening in a woman's uterus. And you could start, the baby has skin. I'll show you kind of a picture of what the skin looks like in the baby. This is ideal that the skull and everything is downwards. This makes birth much easier, but sometimes babies are feet first and they're trying to learn, like depends on the practice of the obstetrician or the midwife, that they may be able to massage the baby into the proper position for birth. Ideally, that's what would happen. Because if a baby is born with feet first, all sorts of complications can happen. I had a niece whose hips were dislocated when she was born because she was feet first. So here's a 12-week-old fetus in the first trimester. So at this point, kidneys are formed. Vocal cords actually appear at only 12 weeks. So that's really fascinating. You see kind of different components. You don't have to know the different parts there. I just wanted to show pictures for people who are interested. Here's a fetus at 12 to 24 weeks. So the muscles are starting to lengthen, and this is when the baby starts to move around. So here the babies are very sensitive to sound. The fetus cannot survive outside of the womb at this point. Here, 20 to 24 weeks, this we say second to third trimester. This is really interesting. Babies are covered with almost like a downy hair. It's called lanugo, right? That's going to go away. And then the skin has a waxy white vernix. And remember, babies are in liquid. In the placenta, in the womb, they're actually in liquid, and that helps to protect the baby. But that is why that they have that vernix to protect their skin at this point. And 38 to 40 weeks ready for birth. So average weight hasn't changed much, about 7.5 pounds. Remember, in the last few weeks, the longer the baby stays in, it's another half pound per week. So that can really add up. All right. So in terms of the fetal period, begins around the 9th week, ends at birth. And that can vary, right? So sometimes if a woman gives birth between 26 and 37 weeks, it's called a preterm baby. 39 weeks and above, it's a full-term baby. So in the fetal period, a lot of growth, especially toward the end. Brain and organ systems become more complex, and then you have the basic sensory capacity. Age of viability is going to be in the fetal period. Viability meaning it can survive outside the womb. Usually that's about 24 weeks, but it's, the earlier a baby comes out, it makes it much more difficult for them to survive. They'll have to go into an incubator. A number of things have to happen to help them survive. Ideally, you want the baby to be born about 40 weeks full term. Any questions about the prenatal development? Let's stop this recording.